This presentation is going to talk about how you can potentially accelerate your interfaces using IPA, using the online database system. It's targeted more towards people in multi-tenant. S3 is pretty much irrelevant at this point. All of this was done with the current cloud suite, and we're also going to be focusing a lot in HR. It is targeted towards people who are developers, so therefore if it's a little bit more casual, feel free to join in and learn along, and maybe it'll trigger some ideas. But if you are a developer and you're looking for some tools to help make your interfaces run a little bit faster, this is definitely your place. So what we're going to do is we're going to first talk about what the problem is. That's going to go real quick because I think everybody kind of knows. Slow. Then we'll talk about the concepts of how you can do it. We'll get into a little bit of querying and how you can use some different tricks within IPA to pull down your data, how to do some mass uploads, and then I'll give you a few pointers that can kind of help you along the way as you develop these interfaces. So the first thing is your problem. We've all developed flows like this. Guess what? I'm going to raise my hand right now. I'm guilty. I've made flows like this where they're very iterative, one record after the other, and we're passing data from one query node to the other. And while it's easy to do and we can certainly get everything we need, it's incredibly inefficient. We end up running into lengthy run times and also getting dreaded memory errors. Down here you can see this particular interface took about 2 hours in order to run. That's a long time. And it's only processing probably about 10 to 12,000 records, not really that many. And then the memory usage, which comes down here in our lovely error column, we can get calls from Infor, like the police saying, hey, your flow is running out of control. You need to optimize this like right now. So be prepared for that. But we're going to give you some tips and tricks in order so you don't have to have that anymore. So what I want to kind of introduce to you and how all of this is going to be presented is in the concept of a dictionary. We all know what it is. We used them in school, well, most of us that are 50 and older. We opened up a book and we looked up a word and it gave us a definition. You can think of the word that we were looking up as a key, the index of the dictionary, and within it was a description of the word, properties. Now in this context, we're going to be looking at JSON objects. So you can think of an object as really anything. Your car, look around you, everything is an object. So how we're gonna visualize it here is we have a bowl sitting on our table. That is our employee dictionary. We're gonna eventually add employees to it, but for right now, we're just gonna add oranges. So I've defined a bowl that's sitting in front of me, and I'm gonna add oranges to the bowl. They're all oranges. They all have a lot of different properties. They're all kind of the same. Employees, they have a lot of similar properties, but there are differences between them. So the orange could weigh however many grams. It could have the water content, the color, the discoloration, the tree it came from. There's all kinds of properties to those oranges. We have one bowl, that's our one object, and then within that bowl, we have a lot of different objects. Same thing here. Now let's translate that into a bowl of employees. Some employees we would really like to put in a bowl because they're a real pain. But in this case, let's just think about it. We have employee 14, we have employee 17, we have employee 100, we have employee 100,000. We have 10,000 employees, active employees in our organization. We have 30,000 employees in our employee master. They're all going into the bowl. They're all going into the object. Each of them has different properties. I started in March of 2015. Another employee probably started in August of 2022. They're all different, but they are the same property. Same thing that we're doing here. We're just putting them into their own bowl. That's our JSON object. Now this next one is ripped right from, where is it? From json.org. There it is. So you can follow this if you're, true hardcore. I'm really not. But you're going to see a lot of this in future slides that we have. We have our object, our JSON. We have a brace between them. So within that object, each one is its own brace. Within the object, we can have a lot of different values. So my employee, I have an employee dictionary. Within that dictionary, I have each employee. Within each employee, I have multiple properties of the object, simple querying. I can have an array. You'll see this come up soon too. And then each value can be anything that we want. It can be a string property, which most of them are. We can use Booleans, whatever it is that we need. Now the key to every one of these objects is going to be our employee. And I know we can do this in supply chain and finance. We can have keys of invoice numbers. We can have keys of purchase order numbers. But an employee is kind of where we're going to stay today. Each employee is its own object. We have values within it. So we got that. Now the next thing, how do we do it? How do we use IPA to pull all this out? The first is using the lovely Landmark admin node. It's fast. You can pull data from this node lightning fast. And you can see that you can have filter strings that you can build in that wonderful Landmark transaction that gives you immediate feedback, gives you a little more flexibility. Take the filter string, pass it in over here. Now one thing about the Landmark admin node, it's a little bit different than our Landmark transaction or even running web run nodes, which we'll get into later, is that we can also pull deleted records. For the most part, and in just about every business class, there's going to be a delete flag for each one. Employee underscore delete flag, purchase order underscore delete flag, payables invoice underscore delete flag. When a record is active, it's going to be this series of 36 zeros. When we hit the delete button, this number changes to the unique ID of that value within the business class. That's how we know that it's logically deleted. So technically it means we can undelete them if we're crafty, but let's not talk about that. That's another session. So we want to make sure we're only pulling active records. If we have all of these people where they're active or their termination date is greater than or equal to a year ago, and they have a specific relationship to organization, then that's going to give us the base of our records. The Landmark admin node has a few limitations. You can't use any related fields like you can in the Landmark transaction. It's only going to pull from that specific business class. I'm extracting everything from employee. I'm extracting everything from payables invoice. Now we all know that employees have work assignments. Payables invoice have distributions. Purchase orders have purchase order lines. So using this method of extraction is extremely fast, but we can only get one business class at a time. But let's circle back into our bowl of oranges. We're building these oranges. We're building these employees. We can add to them with multiple business classes. We can start at employee. We can get a base, because here's our base of the employee. Think of this kind of like a Chipotle bowl. Everybody here's been to Chipotle. You go to the line and they say, what would you like? Would you like white rice or brown rice? Would you like black beans or pinto beans? That's your base. That's where you start. You're putting in all the toppings after you select your rice and beans. So here, instead of rice and beans, we're selecting employees. Once we have that base, we can pull a whole bunch of different things. We go to the toppings bar and we have 3 different kinds of salsa. We only like one. We like the medium tomatillo salsa because it's freaking delicious. But we have the choice. We can put all 3 of them in there if we want to. So now let's think about this with work assignment. If I was going to take employee and I'm going to get a work assignment, I could have multiple work assignments. I could have a primary, I could have a secondary, I could have all kinds of different things. And also, how do I know which employees I need if this was my original base? Termination date, that doesn't exist in work assignment. It only exists in employee. Well, we can extract 30,000 work assignments in a matter of milliseconds using these DB admins. Then we can look inside of our bowl of oranges, our rice and beans, and then we can only add the toppings, the work assignment data, to the ones that we've previously selected, and we can just discard the rest because the method of data extraction is so fast. You're going to be able to get, that 30,000 records exported in less than a second. And then you can process it using some JavaScript. Now, a few limitations about the DB admin node. You can only have up to 2 gigabytes worth of data extracted at a time. So if you have a business class like payroll distributions or time records, you're probably going to have to chunk this and do it within certain ranges, because if you go over 2 gigabytes, this node will fail. I mean, you could get crafty and do exports to files and reading those in, but yeah, let's not go there. Now, as this data comes out of the landmark admin node, I always like to use pipes as my delimiters. You can use whatever you want. Commas are evil, though. So we're pulling in all of our data. We have it all listed in a row. We're going to get 12,000 records. So that's using landmark admin. Now let's talk about using a web run. So we can, with the landmark admin, we also don't have the ability to use derived fields. Derived fields are derived at runtime. So they're based on other pieces of data in the system, and then they'll return back to you those values at runtime. The landmark admin node will only return persistent fields that are stored within the database. But web run nodes, we can go after those derived nodes, and we can get to encrypted data like a social security number, which is important for pretty much any benefit interface. So the first thing you have to do in order to use the web run node within IPA is set up your web run connection in your process server administrator configuration, system configuration. So run as user and data area are blanked here on purpose, just for privacy's sake. I mean, I could have put Santa Claus in there, but anyway. And also your result size. That's probably going to be set to, I think, 5. In the beginning, you can bump it up a little bit so you can get more data back. But we'll talk a little bit more later about how to page these. So using the web run node, from here, you're going to select Infor Lawson, and then build your fields, your filter, and then your root, and put those together. So root and details. There's a reason for this, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But here's a good example of how you can get fields into a web run node. Notice the URL encoder in front of all of these. They have to be, since we're sending something to a web address, we have to make sure that special characters are ignored. So we want to escape our ampersands, our double quotes, our spaces, all of those things. The built-in URL encoder that comes with IPA is perfect for it. I usually just put this whole section on the right over in an assign node in the beginning. So now I have my fields. If I need to update them for any of my web runs, I just go and change it in one place. Makes it easy. And then I build my filter just like I would with a DB export. But notice that I have related fields in here. I'm pulling employee.relationship status. I'm going up a level from work assignment to get to employee. If you do that with any business class. And for those that have used landmark transactions before, remember we could only go one level in our relations. So if we were at work assignment, we could go to HR organization unit dot description, but we couldn't go to HR organization unit dot parent unit dot description. It would fail in the landmark transaction. Here, we can do that. If the relationship is built, we can derive up the chain. Derived fields are also on the table here. So, like first and last name, preferred, whatever it is that we want, we can get it. What's the trade-off? Speed. These run at a much slower pace because it's going through the application layer. We're not just fast exporting out data. Now, it's still going to be leaps and bounds faster than if you use just a landmark transaction. It's going to, you could probably get a good interface flow with DB admins to execute fully in less than a minute. And with these, they might take between 1 and 5 minutes, depending on what it is that you're pulling and how much data you have. But it's pretty simple how you get to it. I'm going to show you how you can derive the URL string that you pass into it next. So the reveal page. The reveal page is wonderful. We all have different ways of getting to it. Just in case you ever forget, you can just go to your administration console and then other and application and system links. That'll take you to the main reveal page. The web services API link will give you all of the APIs that are exposed. I generally use the raw data REST web services. I select my business class, which in this case is work assignment, and then I'm going to look for the get where I'm looking at the generic list. You can use another list if you want to, if it has specific filtering or whatever it is that you're using, but generally you just want to get data out of the business class for what you want. So the generic service list is what you want. So once you have that and you get to it, you can kind of play around with the API and the Swagger. It'll help get you that string that you need to pass into your web run node. And you can also test your filters, you can test your limits, and then just get a general idea for what it is you're going to have returned to you. This is what you're going to end up getting once you do the execute. So here it builds the string for me. This request URL, starting with HCM SOAP. If you were using payables invoice, it would be like /FSM SOAP. And then it's business class list generic, and then putting in the fields. And you can notice that even in the Swagger, it's making it URL encoded. Same thing that URL encoder function does. The response comes back to you as a JSON object. Here's how you read it. So up here with the response body, you have a bracket. The bracket indicates that that's an array. So that means we have one or more records in here. First one is going to be, so with the first record is its own object. The little brace indicates that we're start of a new object. So if I'm parsing this out and I make it to a variable called E, export, that's just my preference, I'm going to have E bracket 0, it's the first element in my array, and then if I look at the underscore count property, that's going to return back to me 39,764. If I want to know how many records I'm getting. Links is going to be another property of E0, and then I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But then we get into the second element, which is another object, and these are fields. Fields are their own array, separated by comma, so that's in our array. So each field, I have an employee and then a value associated with it. So this reads E, because it's an export, sub 1, it's the second element in my array, because this is element 1, this one object, and then E sub 1 sub fields, and then each of those is an array, and then I have another layer on down. So each employee will be its own element in the array. That's how this is returned back to you with a web run node. So you do have to be a little more iterative when you go through it. Hopefully this is landing. Now, when we're doing our queries, I'm going to switch back over to our landmark admin node here. That piece of data that we saw come out, this is just an Excel version of it. Notice in here in highlights, I have numbers. So row 0 is going to be my header, and then starting with row 1, row 2, row 3, and on down, I'm going to have my data. So I have to loop through. I can use the split function, just like I would with any other string, to get these pieces out. Now down here, I have field numbers. So I'm going to be, if I split this header row, so I know that, with the first row of data, column number 1, which is going to be start date, because remember it's 0 based, that's how I could access my start date. So all of these come together. I'm going to show you a little way to optimize this later. Then I can build my own index, my own dictionary, my own bowl of oranges. I'm adding my employees to these as I've exported them, and I'm inserting them into the bowl and giving them properties. So now I can look them up. Do they exist? What can I do with them? What are all their properties? And think about if you're writing out an interface file, you need all of these fields. You got to write them out. Send them to your vendor or your report, whatever it is that you want to do. So this is a query from DB export. It's very flat, very simple. Now the query that's coming out of the web run node, I talked a little bit about this. I'm taking this value right here, the one at the top, that I'm getting from the web run node with my fields, which is an array of fields, so each one is its own. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that into my own referenceable dictionary, my own referenceable JSON object. Employee 14, employee 17. These are array values coming out, and these are keyed values after I've transformed them. It's not that hard. So a few things about your queries. I'm just going to kind of walk through a few of these things here. The first one up at the top, that's how we define our bowl of oranges, our dictionary, our index. We can name it anything we want. You can have fun with with dictionaries and abbreviated, as you can see here. That's really fun if you get creative. So we are defining that as its own JSON object. If we want to reference one of our employees in there, if we have a variable of an employee, like we're coming out of work assignment and we know 14, then I can define that here. Down here, the type of employee dictionary, employee is equal to undefined. What that's going to tell us is, do I have the orange in my bowl? Is the employee available? Did the employee come out into my base? Is the employee active or terminated within a year and meets a specific relationship status criteria? Is my invoice within the past month? Whichever it is. So I'm just looking to find out, does the key exist? And then if not, maybe I'll want to create it. If it doesn't exist, then perhaps I want to exclude it. So the type of is equal to undefined, best friend for looking at this stuff. We can set field names to whatever value we want. You can also use the dotted object notation. I like mine in square brackets just because it's OCD, I'll be honest. Now we get down into our two things. Now there's all kinds of things that we can do with a JSON object. A JSON object has its own methods. These are the two that I use a lot in my interface files. Stringify. Stringify just says, I have a bowl of oranges. I want you to display for me everything about these oranges in text so I can see it. Tell me about all my employees so I can read it. So I can go back to that squiggly line notation and see everything that's in my dictionary. Some things could end up get squirrely with our data. Now we can also parse a string into a JSON object. When we pull data out of the web run node, it comes back in the result variable. That result variable, we can use JSON parse, and now we've turned the string into an object that we can loop through, expose all of its properties and all of its methods. Now we want to pull every orange out of our bowl. Every employee needs to come out so that way they can get onto our file, onto our report, onto whatever it is that we need to do. Just a simple loop. We can loop for every employee that's in our dictionary because each entry within the dictionary, every index value, has its own employee. The employee will then, of course, have all of its properties. It's fun stuff. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is uploads. So we can do batch uploads. Everybody here has probably used Spreadsheet Designer. Spreadsheet Designer is wonderful, but it can be a little slow. It can take time. It does give us really nice feedback, colored, and we can do it. Now, a lot of times in IPA flows, once again, guilty. I've done them iterative to where they've been updated one record at a time. But I got to thinking, if Spreadsheet Designer can do this and upload in a batch, then why can't I? And that's exactly what this will do. Every business class you'll see in your Swagger has an action and a batch function to it. So the batch function allows you to create your own JSON object with multiple records and upload them to the server, and then it will return back to you messages for every record that it performed an action on. It'll return back the message like you would receive on the screen, and if there's an exception, it'll return back to you the exception message and the field in which it had a problem, and then you can parse it. It goes pretty quick. You might want to, if you're putting up about 50,000 records, you probably want to do those in a loop. You wouldn't want to do them all at once. So here's a little bit about how you would create an upload. So the top we got from our Swagger, and then we're just creating within an assigned node our object, our upload object. If we notice from the previous screen, we have records. It wants a records object, and within the records, it wants an array of records that it's supposed to update. So we can have one record, we could have 100, however many. We're just inserting them into an array. So here, we're just going to define that array, that records array. We'll put stuff into it. Then we just create some sort of temporary object. So a temporary object is its own JSON with these fields, and then we can pull them from wherever it is that we need. And then all we have to do is call the push method of this records array and insert the object. So that means if we're doing some sort of query where we need to change things in the application, we can build a whole line of these objects and then upload them into the system with one call, or loops, depending on how many you're doing. Here's more of how it looks. So our records, once again, it's an array. Each of these are going to go up into the system. Now, what I'll show you in the next screen, little sneak preview, is that one of these is going to work and one of them is not. So that way you can see the difference in how it's going to be returned back to you. The web run node itself, pretty basic. We've already set up our web run node in our main system configuration. We select Infor Lawson. The web program is going to be our URL that we derive from Swagger. We'll post it. Always, the method down here is always post. And then our post string, we're going to use our favorite stringify function because we have an object. We need to send that as text. We're going to stringify our upload object, which is this. That's what's going to end up going to the web server. Once we post that and we run it, we're going to end up getting something like this. So the first record up here, we can see that this one, the work assignment, updated. It really didn't do anything. Didn't change a doggone thing. But just to illustrate that it works. So now we have fields instead of exception. On the second one, we have exception because the manager 987654 does not exist. So we have it all back. At the bottom, we have the code for how to do it. We have to parse our result. Then we're going to loop through that object, and if we don't have an or if we do have an exception, then we can log that appropriately. Now, for some records, if you're doing a create, like let's say you're doing a payables invoice. A payables invoice is going to have a unique number associated with it, not the invoice number that the vendor gives you, but the auto sequence system number, and we might want to get that so that way we can do something else with it. If we would pass in the field in here or in our payload with no value, then this, when it comes back, will return the value that it created, so we could use it later. In this example, we're not creating work assignments, we're just doing updates, but that is available just in case. Now, a couple little tips and tricks. Remember that we had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for our headers. Accessing these can be challenging. So you can look at, if we're going to split this out, we can use 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then if we insert a field that comes prior to this, because DB export goes in order of fields, you can't just order them any way you want, now we have to renumber everything to where it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What I like to do, I have a little function for it, is to define the header value, work type, and assign it the value that it came out in my split function. So in this case, work type would be equal to 5. It's just a way to reference the value from the one particular row of data that I'm looking at. If I added the employee's name to this, this would reorder all of these, so work type would end up being value 6, because it's going to come later. That way I don't have to keep numbering 5 to 6. I just use work type, and then the system is dynamically assigning the value 5 or the value 6 or the value 2, whatever it is, depending on where it is in the header sequence. That's a little advanced, but hopefully it'll just get you thinking. Now the other thing is web paging. So if we're going to use our web run node, we might want to page these things. In this case, it's, well, I have listed there 5,000. So pull me 5,000 records. I'd like you to page with the next function. So that way, kind of like the old page down in S3. So that way I'll get the first 5,000 records, then I'll get the next 5,000 records, and then I might get 2,000 after that until it's done. And that's what this list does down here. I have my E, because I love the letter E. It's Sesame Street. JSON, and I'm parsing the result of my work assignment, and then it will come back with the word actions if I'm done with my paging. When actions is returned, then that means I can just set the length of that export to 0, and then my branch condition over there will drop me out of the loop. So, but otherwise, what it will do is it's going to take my links and my href and then just replace the 2 dots with nothing. Look up here. So once again, record 0, links, the second link, because the first one is my self, and then my second record is my next. And here, this contains everything that the web run node will need in order to move to the next page of data. So this just comes if you have large subsets, or maybe you're pulling big fields. Like if you pulled an audit log field, then you probably only want to get maybe 100 or 2 at a time. So that way you can, because the audit log is going to be huge. Now another thing you can do, this is a flow, this is the last slide, it's a lot. Doing nothing but DB exports. This particular thing right here could probably run in less than a minute. And that's doing everything. Pulling the entire supervisory structure, it's pulling, it's getting employee contact information from the employee without using derived fields, because they're all stored as like used for payroll or used for work email, used for work phone, and then they'll have employee contact numbers. We're getting every employee contact and pulling it in. But we can also use these as lookups. How many times do we really need to look at HR organization unit to get the description? So these first couple here, they're going and they're pulling out some base data. I'm pulling out HR org unit. I'm going to insert that into my own bowl. We can think of that as a bowl of apples. So now each apple has its own description. Each HR org unit has its own description. Every job, that's a Kiwi. So now I have a bowl of Kiwis. That Kiwi has a description. My job has its own. So when eventually I get to work assignment and I get Kiwi number 234, job 234, that can come back to me and say RN. Or I get HR org unit 222, and then that comes back as 5 North. I have a lookup. I have my own dictionaries that I've built in the beginning before I even get to how I'm going to build my base, how I'm going to start my Chipotle bowl, how I'm going to put oranges, my employees. So there's all kinds of different things that we can do with our IPA interfaces. That's a lot in a short period of time. And it takes a little bit to get these humming and working, but they're very reusable. Once you do this a couple times, you have a base and a blueprint to do future interfaces, and they'll become extremely easy to write. The hard part is, of course, getting some of the specs right and getting the data to do what it is that you want to do. But you'll be able to turn some of those interfaces to get data from the live transactional-based system quickly and efficiently, and then you can also keep the memory police off your back. So that's pretty much all we have today. I don't know if there's going to be any questions. We have several events where you could certainly learn a lot more about this in our HCM Road Mapping Festival that's coming up at the end of February here in Baltimore. I'll be here, and I'd love to talk about this. I could talk about it all day long. If I do this for 40 minutes, imagine actually getting me to talk about it even more. And then we also have a Cloud Suite Boot Camp coming up in Tampa at the end of January. Another great opportunity. We have lots of people here at RPI that know this methodology, and we're more than happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you, Jeff. We do have a couple questions. I think the first one is just a verification that you cannot pull derived user fields using LN admin.
You can pull user fields, but you cannot pull derived fields. I did not specify that. Okay. So from the Landmark admin node, you can export user fields, but you can't use them in the filter criteria in a Landmark admin node. That'll drive you crazy too.
Interesting. Is Data Lake an alternative to some of the self-styled dictionaries?
Absolutely. Data Lake is going to be your replication sets. So then they're going to go off into their own area. This is just an alternate way to use the online transactional up to the moment system to get data in a tool that we know. It's kind of like a comforting blanket. We all know how to use IPA.